Thank you all for joining us, whether you're joining live or watching a recording. I'm super excited tonight because we have Mrs. Rhoda Chee, who is a dietitian. So, nutrition and dietetics is her expertise. And we have the wonderful privilege of asking her lots of questions when it comes to menstruation and understanding how nutrition can impact our menstrual cycle. I know before Rhoda and I talked about menstruation with fertility, which, there are some important things that we may see some overlap with this discussion compared to the last, but as a whole, we want to make sure you all understand healthy menstruation. So before we discuss what healthy menstruation is, and then give Rhoda a chance to educate us on how nutrition can allow for us to have a healthy menstrual cycle for the entire duration. I want for Rhoda to introduce herself to us so that way you all can get to know her and also just get to know more about why she's doing what she's doing and just what led her to this passion of hers.
Sure. As Jan mentioned, my name is Rhoda, and if you haven't had a chance to, or if you didn't get a chance to join us during our last session, or you didn't get to watch the recording, I focus primarily on fertility and supporting women through fertility. So I help women optimize their fertility for future pregnancy by teaching them how to track and chart their menstrual cycle. And by tuning into that, looking at their nutrition and foundational factors to make improvements in, again, not just their menstrual cycle, but fertility.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Well, this afternoon for you because she is in the lovely Hawaii, y'all. So I'm a little jealous, but it's okay. But first and foremost, I want to talk about what healthy menstruation is. And I'll give a little bit of information that I want you to, add into this as well, because you said something that you're teaching women how to track their menstrual cycle. And I do the same as well. But I would love for you to go into more detail with that in just a moment. So first, before we let her tell us how to track our menstrual cycle, if y'all don't know, menstruation should occur roughly every 30 days. So generally speaking, a normal range is somewhere between 21 to 35 days. And yes, it can be that big of a range. However, your normal should still be within 2 to 3 days of whatever you were the previous month. So the previous month, let's say you are one of the few, society tells us we should have a 28-day cycle, but it's actually not that common. So let's say you're one of the few who does have a 28-day cycle. Let's say one month you come at that 28 days, the next month you may come at 30 or 31. That is still considered to be within normal range. However, if you start noticing that, it's changing by about a week at a time, that is something we want to discuss and we want to figure out what is going on with that. Also, with healthy menstruation, you should not have large clots. So anything like a quarter size or larger is something you want to have a conversation about. Even if one clot itself is not a quarter size or larger, if you're having several clots, we want to talk about what is causing that so we can get to the root issue. So that's some basic information with healthy menstruation and also heavy bleeders. We're going to talk about y'all too because I had a lot of questions sent to me about asking, particularly about one thing in relation to heavy bleeding. So we're going to talk about that. But if you're soaking through a pad and you're having to change it more than every 2 hours, then you are a heavy bleeder. If you're having to change your cup several times a day or a menstrual disc, whatever you may be using, you're a heavy bleeder. Same thing with a tampon. If you're having to change it more than every 2 hours, you're a heavy bleeder. And we want to make sure that we are supplementing what you may need nutritionally, getting the things in your diet. And that is why we have Miss Rhoda here to talk to us about that. So, Rhoda, now since we've kind of talked a little bit about what health menstruation looks like, tell us what are you doing with women to help them track their cycles? That way they can know what normal is for them.
Sure. And I want you to keep me honest and make sure that I don't skip any part of the question because it is I guess a somewhat of a loaded question.
It is. Yes,
um,
it is.
so in terms of clients that I work with, when we look at their menstrual cycle and we compare it to what we deem as a healthy or optimal menstrual cycle, we look at six different parameters, I would call it. So I think generally what we think of or what women look at when they're looking at their whether their menstrual cycle is healthy or not is just the overall length, like you mentioned, of the cycle. But there are, like I said, six parameters that I look at with my clients. So when we look at overall length, you kind of pointed at this, but I consider a healthy and normal menstrual cycle to be between 24 to 35 days. With like you mentioned as well, there could be some variation in the length of the cycle. So if it varies less than 8 days from cycle to cycle, that's still considered normal. However, if it is going from the very lower end to the very higher end, and it's more than 8 days, then that's something to look at. There's something impacting the cycle, and that's when we wouldn't consider it a normal, healthy cycle. So that's one parameter. The second parameter that we look at is your menstruation length or your bleed length and the quality of that. What we consider to be healthy is anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And with regards to that, generally the menstrual flow starts off heavy and then going to, more light and very light. As far as the color, it's generally going to be a deep burgundy red kind of color. And then towards the lighter end, it starts to become like a light red, pink, maybe even brownish. And then in terms of the amount, that's a normal healthy amount is anywhere from like 1 to 3 ounces. Like Dion mentioned, if it's much greater than that, then that's, there's something to look at and discuss with your healthcare provider. And on the opposite end, if it's much less than that, then that's also something that you want to consider talking to your healthcare provider for. And the last thing I'll mention is pain. So any pain that's more than mild would be considered abnormal with a menstrual cycle. So if you're having to take, you know, any type of medication to help with pain during your cycles, then that's not considered normal and healthy, and that's something that you want to seek support for. Another parameter is the preovulatory phase. So the preovulatory phase pretty much spans kind of like the beginning of your cycle to right after you ovulate. So ovulation, we consider part of that preovulatory or yeah, the ovulation ends that preovulatory phase. But during that time frame, it can be anywhere from 10 to 23 days, depending on how soon someone ovulates. But during that time, there's generally what we call pre-ovulatory dry days, where, and I'll get into cervical mucus here, but
Yes.
where we wouldn't be seeing any cervical mucus or discharge. And then the next parameter is that cervical mucus pattern. So towards the very end of the preovulatory phase leading up to ovulation, we are going to hopefully see some signs of cervical mucus production. And it generally oftentimes starts with what we call non-peak cervical mucus. And and then it oftentimes goes to what we call peak mucus. And it varies. Sometimes some women might just go straight from having the dry days to peak mucus, and that's totally fine too. But oftentimes what we call healthy is going from like I mentioned, the non-peak to the peak mucus, and having at least one full day of peak mucus. And then the ovulation piece is the other parameter that we look at, making sure that you do ovulate.
Yes.
Because if you don't ovulate, then that's obviously something to look at. That means your cycle, you're not cycling normally. Um, and you ovulate in general about roughly 2 days. Sometimes in some women, not a lot of women, but some women ovulate maybe 3 days after what we call their peak day, which is that last day that you observe peak cervical mucus. And then once you ovulate, we go into our post-ovulatory phase, and that phase in a healthy normal cycle ranges between 10 to 17 days. What we consider optimal, though, is 12 to 15 days. And that's because if the post-ovulatory phase is much shorter than that, it could impact the chances of an egg being able to implant and fertilize before the lining is shed, and then you have your next cycle.
Yes. No, and you gave so much great information. And one thing that you mentioned, I will go back to is the amount of blood itself when you're menstruating is 1 to 3 ounces. And that, y'all, she means for the entire menstruation, like so the entire period.
Correct.
Because some people are like, oh, I do that in a day. Well, we need to talk. So yeah, so that's for the entire period. And just like she mentioned, around 7 days is usually what we see, 3 to 7 days. If you're menstruating more than 8 to 9 days, once again, we need to talk as well. And you mentioned cervical mucus and ovulation. That is something I actually talk to women about when it comes time with them starting to track their cycle because they should be looking at the cervical mucus. And a lot of it, I was surprised to find out that a lot of women don't know the differences and the different changes that occur within, the different phases of menstruation. So, for those who don't know, menstruation has different phases. So the entire cycle is called menstruation. However, the first portion of it is your menstrual cycle. Then after that, you move into more so your follicular phase, you move into ovulation, and then your luteal phase. So you have 4 different phases within the entire portion of menstruation. So, Rhoda, do you mind telling us a little bit more about the cervical mucus? Because that's something I typically talk to women about as well, like the different changes. And the biggest one people want to know is how can I look at my cervical mucus and tell I'm ovulating?
Sure. And too bad I don't have my little trinkets and things to kind of do this with, but hopefully I'll be able to answer the question as best I can without it. So when we talk about cervical mucus, I think where I want to start is talking about where the cervical mucus is formed. So the cervical mucus is formed in where we is formed in the by the cervical crypts in our cervix. And
Mhm.
so when we, as I mentioned, when we get towards ovulation, our cervical crypts, there are hormonal changes that occur, and that's when we start seeing potentially the non-peak cervical mucus. So non-peak cervical mucus is what we consider to be more whitish. It doesn't stretch as much as cervical mucus would. And then what we consider to be peak cervical mucus is clear. So clear, stretchy, and what we consider to be lubricative. And so the only way that you will be able to identify your cervical mucus is the way that I teach my clients is the wiping method.
Mhm.
And so that's the fertility awareness method that I teach. And so what the wiping method entails is every time you go and use a toilet, before you empty out whatever you're using the toilet for, you're going to wipe from front to back and take a look at the toilet paper, and if there's anything that you can pick up and stretch with your finger, that's potentially your cervical mucus. And then when you observe and take a look at what that is, again, if you see it as a more whitish tinge, or if it's clear, more clear, then that'll kind of let you know. And then again, how much it stretches, that'll let you know whether it's non-peak or peak cervical mucus. And there are other things that you might see with regard to that cervical mucus. So there is mucus that might be what we call more pasty or even gummy, or even mucus that has kind of like a yellowish tinge to it. Those are something to look further into because those also would be indicative of something going on with your hormones and with your cycle or it could be factors related to nutrition and sleep and stress and those kind of things, inflammation. So yeah, so if you're seeing those kind of things, and definitely something to talk to specialists about.
Awesome. No, and that all of that is great because, like I said, a lot of women don't recognize the different changes that occur with the cervical mucus. And one of the easiest ways, if you are someone who eats eggs, if you look at the egg white, how it's kind of sticky and it's kind of clearish, that
Mhm.
usually indicates, hey, if it looks like this, you're probably ovulating, okay? So you're
Yeah,
probably at that phase. So that's usually like a good, and that way you can at least start getting an idea. But definitely, I
mhm.
appreciate you said the wiping method, and then she emphasized the
Yeah.
front to back. Please know that that is so important. It can help prevent UTI. So front to back all the
Mhm,
time,
mhm,
just
mhm,
so that we can, get an idea, and that way you can start learning your body because it is going to change, especially as we age. So now
mhm.
that we know what
And
healthy menstruation is, yes, yes, I'm so sorry.
actually, I did want to add, after I stopped talking, I realized I didn't continue the method. So we
Yeah.
actually want to wipe twice. The way that I teach, we actually encourage you to wipe twice. So wipe before you empty whatever you need to into the toilet, and then you wipe again after. So we're going to talk about poop. So I hope no one gets skittish about about poop. But obviously, if you're gonna poop, you still want to check for the cervical mucus, but you don't want to get messy and grossed out and everything and have to touch your poop. So you're gonna wipe the poop out, and then once it's hopefully out as much as possible and wiped up, then you're going to wipe again front to back and then see if there's any mucus again, because there are women and there are cases where some women might not see any type of cervical mucus or discharge until after they've pushed, because that process of letting the pee or the poo out sometimes also helps to push down some of that cervical mucus. So
Yes.
we wipe before and after.
Yes, no, and that's an awesome tip because the pelvic floor is supposed to relax when you go to defecate or urinate, which would make
Mhm,
sense. That's how the cervical mucus can move down, especially in that
mhm.
gravity-based position. So that all that makes perfect sense. Awesome. Awesome. And so we have a good idea now as to what healthy menstruation should look like, what we should be looking for. And the reason why we mentioned ovulation is because ovulation is something that is very important when it comes to menstruation itself. Even if you're not trying to get pregnant, you want to make sure that you still are ovulating because it tells you a lot about your health and your menstrual cycle. Because if you did not know, your menstrual cycle is a vital sign. I already said you should have it roughly every month. So that way you are tracking it, please. So make sure you're tracking it. And we also want to make sure you're ovulating. But so Rhoda has given us some wonderful information as far as how to do that. Now we have to get to the meat of it because we want to know what can we do nutritionally to help support us with the menstrual cycle. And I have to be honest and say, this is something I did not know growing up. And I wish I would have because the solution that a lot of providers gave me was, well, maybe you should just take birth control since you're skipping your period. Well, I was an athlete and I'm sure you've heard and you've seen that. Well, birth control is not the answer. We really want to take a look at nutrition. So Rhoda, let us know. You can, and you probably just by me telling you that you probably can diagnose and indicate what happened to me when I was younger.
Mhm, mhm. And obviously, because this isn't something, our menstrual cycle and what's considered normal and optimal and all of that. I don't know about you or some folks that might be listening in or joining on the call. I don't know about you, but during my middle school and high school years, none of the classes taught me about what a healthy menstruation looks like and what a healthy cycle looks like. And so, even like you, Dion, when I was growing up in high school, I was also active in sports. And then, because of the mentality that we had of, having a certain body type and all of that, I'm gonna take a drink of water. I feel a cough coming on. Excuse me.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Um, so I too actually had irregular cycles in high school. And I guess before I continue on with the answer, I do want to mention that when we first hit menarche, or when we start having our periods, there is a period of several years where it needs to normalize. So during
Yes.
those early years after we start bleeding, there's going to be fluctuation in what our how long our cycle is and all of that. And then when we get to kind of like the middle phase of our menstruating life, they start to normalize, and then towards the very tail end, within the 10 years before we go through menopause, then it again will vary and have some fluctuation. But yeah, in high school and after high school in my college years, I did also have a lot of variability in my cycle. And like you, Dion, I was told to go on birth control. And because I didn't know then what I know now, I said, sure, okay. So when I started taking the pill, and when I did take them as instructed, I did bleed when I was supposed to bleed, not knowing that that bleed is not a true menstrual bleed. It's
Exactly.
just yeah.
Yes.
Um, and so I think I might be getting off, but
No, you're fine. So, because we were just talking about how, nutrition itself can impact, and with
mhm,
athletes, we don't consider that there may be some nutritional deficits. They may not be getting
right,
some, as simply like enough calories, just the very
right,
basic of just not
exactly,
eating enough. So, if you don't mind,
exactly.
like telling us what you typically would recommend or what you would see, how you would go about approaching that conversation.
So I guess we'll stay in the line of folks who maybe are in sports or physically active, or even under eating, because that can also happen, especially if we're in sports or very physically active. So when we are undernourished, and that could be intentional for, like I said, wanting a particular, trying to get towards a particular physique. When we're undernourishing intentionally or unintentionally, we are likely not eating enough calories or nutrients. And I'm going to say calories or nutrients because sometimes we could potentially be eating enough calories, but
Yes,
all the calories that we are eating don't have sufficient nutrients in them
yes.
to supply our bodies and the various processes that our bodies go through for menstruation and other things to keep us normal and healthy. And so, what can happen when we're under eating or undernourishing and our bodies don't have what it needs is that our bodies and the processes will turn down kind of and say, okay, I don't have what I need to potentially get pregnant and carry a baby. So I'm going to minimize the chances of that happening, and then we're going to lose our bleed and our cycle, and then all other uh, issues could happen also from there.
No, and I like that you made it a point to emphasize it's not just the calories, it's also the nutritional value of the food as well. And
Mhm.
I know that a lot of people typically ask, well, how many calories should I be getting? And that's truly individualized. Yes, we have a roundabout number, but I also know when I was competing, the number of calories I had was extremely high because I was burning a lot more. So it truly is individualized. So if y'all want to know more so where you should be caloric wise and also nutrient wise, then you want to set up an individual appointment with Rhoda. That way she can develop a plan just for you because just like it's not, one size fits all with like clothing, it's the same thing when it comes to our nutrition and our life in general. So I'll leave that piece and just we'll leave it at that. So if y'all want something personalized when it comes to what you should be eating as far as you as an individual, y'all want to set up a one-on-one with her for that. But so we're going to now she's going to give us, I'm hoping she'll give us some basic general information nutritionally as far as what can we do, what can we eat to support our body, especially because now there's this concept that's out there when it comes to cycle syncing with not just exercise, but even with food. So what can we actually eat to support our body? Is there truth to cycle syncing with food? I know I just asked you like 800 questions, so pick where you want to start.
Okay. I think what I'll start off answering this question by is kind of what we I think discussed in our last call, talking about um, what foods and how the general idea of how we should eat to support our menstrual cycle health and fertility. So um, uh, ideally, we want to be consuming real food, and that means minimally processed as much as possible, foods that look how they were grown, um, and foods that don't generally have a nutrition label on them, although some whole real foods might. So we want to consume ideally real food. Uh, those foods support our hormone production, and they help facilitate um, regular ovulation. So aside from speaking on real food, I'm going to talk about animal sources of especially protein. We want to look for foods that are ideally grass-fed, or look for food products that had come from animals that have been either grass-fed, pasture-raised, free range, wild caught, organic when we can. So those foods from or those products from those animals um, will have a higher nutrient content than foods that are not. So and then for specific foods, I would say my kind of not I wouldn't say it's a long list, but um, the list that I generally go by is, consuming eggs, liver and organ meats, meat that's on the bone, meat that's slow cooked, bone broth if you can, fish, especially fatty fish and other seafood, full fat dairy products, foods that have been fermented, um, vegetables, especially leafy green vegetables, uh, fruits, especially berries, and then I think speaking on hydration, we want to make sure that we do get electrolytes when we are consuming water. Um, and then when we look at particular nutrients, we want to make sure that the foods that we are consuming are have adequate amounts or high in things like choline, iron, vitamin A, folate, B vitamins, minerals like iodine and selenium. Antioxidant foods, copper, zinc. So I'll start off with that. And then remind me what other piece of that question was
The
again.
other part is that I know cycle syncing, not just with
Mhm.
exercise, but also with food, has become a popular topic. And some people may know how I feel about the exercise and cycle syncing. I mean, they've had women win Olympic medals at every single phase of their cycle, and adjust your exercise to how you feel. And because there's no one size fits all. It's not, oh, I should lift more during this phase. It's based upon how you feel. So what's going on with the nutritional aspect? Because I keep hearing these things, and I've looked at the research, and I'm like, you know what? I'm talking to an expert. Let me just ask her.
And I actually agree with your I think with your thought on it. Um, so while there are folks that discuss and encourage cycle syncing, so I think one of the more common ones is seed cycling. Um, so eating certain or particular seeds during the earlier half of your cycle versus the later half. But in terms of like foods, I think we don't want to overcomplicate eating. So I think in general, what we just want to do is focus on the foods that and the type of foods that I mentioned. And if they make you feel great, you want to, again, as you're tracking your cycle, track how you're feeling, any symptoms and moods that might change as you're eating or after you eat. Just track all those things and see how it impacts you, because how a food or how something might impact me, it's going to be different from how it impacts you and another woman and another woman. So you definitely want to individualize how you eat, and not just because a Olympic athlete is eating a certain way and her cycle is totally normal doesn't unfortunately isn't going to mean that that's going to be the same for you. If you are exercising to a great extent and you're finding that you're losing your cycle, that likely means that you need to up how much you're eating or what you're eating in terms of the nutrient dense foods. And from my mentor, I did hear that there was a lady who was um, she was training for a marathon, and in their discussion, she knew that it was going to be impacted, or that is going to impact her cycle with the amount of training that she was doing, and the fact that she wasn't intending on modifying how much she ate or what she ate. And so she did see changes in her cycle, and thankfully, after she finished that goal, then she switched back what she was doing with her diet, and eventually got her cycles back to normal. Um, but yeah, in terms of syncing your cycle for what you're eating, I'd say if you want to try it out, by all means you can try it out. If that's something that you want to see, if it impacts you in a good way, then definitely try it out. I don't want to make a big blanket statement to say that cycle syncing is going to help you or not help you. So it may or may not.
Yeah, I agree. It's truly individualized, and
Mhm,
even with not just cycle syncing, but also like certain dietary like preferences and restrictions,
mhm,
those are also individualized because I'll speak for myself personally. We eat a lot of plants, so I do have a more plant-based diet. However, I still consume animal products, including meat, because if I don't, I start feeling very weak. So that is me personally. But there are other people I know, they don't have the same response, and they're able to, strictly stick with a whole, like just solely plants altogether. So, how are you guiding women who may have different dietary restrictions or preferences, where they may be vegetarian, pescatarian, or even vegan, where they have a much more strict diet? How are you guiding them with recommendations when it comes time with their meal planning, especially with trying to maintain healthy menstruation?
Um, I would say I'm not one to specifically tell you how to eat. How you eat is your choice. What I do with my clients is I go over the information with them, and either they take it as is at face value, and hopefully they make their own choice with it. But yeah, I generally just present the information to my clients, and because we're generally tracking their cycle, they can try it a certain way and see how that impacts their cycle. And then if it's leaning towards becoming, if their cycle is becoming irregular, or there are issues that come up with their cycle, or how they're feeling, or their health in general, having other symptoms, then we might have to tweak it a different way. So yeah, I don't generally force or say you have to eat this, or you can't eat that. I generally just present the information, and I leave it to my clients to decide what they want to do.
Awesome. No, I like that you give them that autonomy, because it is their decision, and the goal as
Mhm.
clinicians is for us to help guide and not to necessarily decide. So I love that you
Mhm.
give them that autonomy for that. And one thing that you did mention, and this, because this topic came up a lot in the questions before when I on Instagram, is iron deficiency, especially during menstruation. Sometimes with women who are heavy bleeders, other times even women who will still have a normal bleeding pattern. But what can they do in preparation? Because you already mentioned liver, you mentioned some of the green leafy vegetables. What can they do in preparation for their period to make sure their ferritin levels, those iron stores aren't dropping too significantly, and that also they're able to maintain better iron levels? Is there anything that they can do to help their body with this?
Uh, well, first off, I would probably encourage you to get your ferritin and iron levels tested to see where you lie, because um, depending on how you're eating and uh, what you're doing, your iron levels may be in the normal end. And I guess with that, I'll say that the parameters of what's considered healthy in terms of your lab values for iron are very wide. So it could be on the lower end and still be considered normal or healthy. So first off, hopefully you've gotten or you asked your provider to test your ferritin and your iron levels. But take a look at that first before you make any changes, because without testing, you don't know whether what you're doing is helping or maybe potentially harming. So getting your levels tested, and then again, we discussed liver and organ meats. So I will mention that liver and organ meats are the most nutrient dense foods when it comes to micronutrients, and it's especially high in what we call heme iron. So heme iron is what's more readily absorbed by our bodies, that versus non-heme iron, which isn't as readily absorbed. And so once you test and you see what your levels are, if you are keen to trying liver, there are different methods and different types of liver that you can try. In general, chicken liver is maybe a little bit easier to start with if you've never eaten liver, or even didn't grow up eating liver.
It is an interesting
But
texture. It is.
yeah. So maybe try with chicken liver first, and I wouldn't recommend someone who's never eaten liver just straight out, saute or heat up the liver and eat it straight by itself. I would recommend adding a little bit to foods that you're already eating, like a meatloaf. I love making meatloaf and getting ground up liver in there. Um, But you can add it to, spaghetti, other meat sauces, any other foods that you're eating, just chop them up, eat it, get them in there. Um, and then, once you start getting used to it, you can try liver on its own. But otherwise, I think in general, unless you've, again, grown up eating liver and are fine with the taste and texture, you probably want to opt to add it and incorporate it into foods that you're already eating. And, start small. Don't go half liver and half, the other meat or protein type. Go maybe like a third or even less than that to start off with. Um, and then, incorporating, like I mentioned, liver. And if there are other foods that you can incorporate as well, but they're not going to be as high in that heme iron. And so if you end up preferring or wanting to supplement, you do want to make sure that this is going to be a whole nother topic, but you want to take a look at where you are obtaining that supplement from. Make sure that the company is like third party certified. That there's that it's the particular type of iron that you're looking for. And when you do take iron, you want to start. Iron supplement, you do want to start slow because some women might not fare well to supplemental iron.
Yes, and I know
Um,
a common symptom of it is constipation. So
mhm.
it is a common symptom. And then you mentioned heme iron. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe heme iron is animal based. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I know non-heme iron is more plant-based, and I know that at least from what I've seen. But like I said, you're the expert in this, so please correct me if I'm wrong at any point. At least what I've seen is that it shows that we actually absorb animal-based, the heme iron, better. Is that true?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
definitely true. Mhm.
Okay, so y'all, you heard her. Make sure you know more about your supplements. And this is the first time you've heard her mention supplements, so we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment because I love that it took this long for us to even mention that word because it sounds like, I could be wrong, but it sounds like you should be getting most of your nutrition from the food that you're actually eating. What would you say?
Yes, that would be preferred. Yeah, particularly because if we can supplement all we want, but it's supplements are exactly what they are. They're supposed to supplement our diet, and so we can't as much as we can try, we can't out supplement non-nutrient dense diet.
Yes. No, I completely understand and agree because sometimes people just try to supplement without actually eating the right way. And
Mhm,
there is a balance. There is a
mhm.
balance. And just in case your provider has not told you and you are on iron, make sure you also have enough vitamin C in your diet because that is something that I commonly see. People have no idea that they also need vitamin C to actually absorb the iron. So you heard Rhoda tell you, know more about your supplements, know where they're coming from, know what's actually going into them, know what they're made of. So that way you can make the best decision for you. And since she led us to supplements, let's talk about them because we know that supplements itself are not truly regulated. So, what would you say we should look for when trying to determine whether or not we actually have a good vitamin or a good supplement?
There are a few things that I would say to look for, and I think we might have also discussed it in our last call. But aside from checking to see, where it's coming from, or the information about the company who you're getting it from, you want to look at again if it's third party tested to see if what you're getting in that iron supplement or that supplement in general is what in fact you're getting. We don't want to get, things like of their heavy metals in that because the supplement could be produced in the same facility that's producing, something else that we don't generally want in our supplement. Um, and so aside from that, you want to look at the specific type of that nutrient. So I'm going to use the example of like iron. There's like iron bisglycinate, which is what we would prefer other over other types of iron supplement. So you want to look at the specific type of that iron or supplement, and then also the amount. You know, one. one supplement might have, a certain amount, like, 300 milligrams or something, and another might have, much more than that. And so, depending on hopefully what you see in your test, you're going to want to decide whether or not you need one pill versus another, or multiple pills, like two versus just one. So looking at those things.
Awesome. And so with supplements, I know it's very common for people to say, "Oh, I have a friend taking this, or someone's taking this," and they decide to take it as well. And I know for some people that can actually cause some issues. So with you being a dietitian, do you, should before people start taking supplements, I know you mentioned they really should have labs. Should they see a dietitian so that way they can try to determine, is a supplement needed, or maybe we can get it more from the diet? What should they do in that case?
Yes, I would generally recommend, if you're able to speak with a dietitian, or at the very least kind of go to some uh, evidence-based sites. A lot of dietitians have information on their websites about supplements, and what to look for. So looking at that, and there are also sites that have information on how much is what's considered healthy or optimal, with the amount of supplementation you're taking. Um, One thing that I talk about with clients is you don't just want to take a supplement just for the sake of taking it. You want to have a reason or a goal for that. Otherwise, you're just kind of um, putting the money down the drain,
Yeah.
so to speak. Um, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So I know before we mentioned like with the whole food diet, and one thing that I commonly see is because processed foods are so readily available and also they're cheaper. So it's something that it is a common problem, especially within the United States itself, where the Western-based diet is full of processed foods, full of saturated fats, full of sodium and sugar, all those different things. What can we do to try to help better educate women, especially young women who are still developing eating habits? What can we do to better educate them so that way they can start making better choices with food?
I'll start off by saying sometimes, unfortunately, growing up, um, our taste buds kind of start when we're young, especially even actually even when we're in the womb. We start getting, developing those taste buds or preferences for certain foods. So that's why I like to specialize in fertility, because it can impact, your children as they grow in age. So I start off with that. But in terms of getting, the younger generation to learn about this, I would say if we can get parents more aware of this, and hopefully share the information with the young people that they know, that will help. Because sometimes, unfortunately, this information isn't taught in our schools, and maybe even if they are, sometimes that's not, unfortunately, the focus of kids at that age. There are other things that they're seeing and hearing, and that is maybe more of their focus at that time. So I think, as the earlier that we can get this information and share it with them, having families eat more of a real food base. And it's hard to not uh, purchase or consume packaged products, but aim for, at least I like to go by like the 80-20 rule, where the majority of the time try to eat real food, and then 20% of the time, or as little as possible, go ahead and have that processed food product. So it's not like 100% we need to be eating perfectly, because I don't think that's that doable for anyone, really. Especially with our modern lifestyle now. We are at some point going to need to have some packaged foods, especially if folks who are traveling, or in areas where, in times when we can't have um, uh, food readily available, or cooked with every meal. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, it starts with again, when we're preparing for pregnancy, during pregnancy, and then when we're younger, hopefully sharing the information with the younger generation.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. So, is there anything else when it comes to nutrition for healthy menstruation that you would like for us to know? Something I may not have asked because with me being a physical therapist, these are basic conversations I have, and then I refer them to you. I refer them to
Mhm.
dietitians, so that way they can have that truly individualized plan. They actually can have sit down with someone who specializes just in this. So what may I have missed? What would you like to share so that way we can make sure that people are better educated on this topic?
I'd say, and I think we sort of discussed this earlier in the call, but in terms of our nutritional needs, it varies throughout our cycle and throughout the different stages of our life. So when we're in our adolescent or teenager age, we're growing and developing. And likely active. So the amount of nutrients and calories that we need then is going to be different from someone who's a little bit further along in their life and maybe not no longer developing in that way. Someone who, like we talked about earlier, is very physically active is going to be needing more of the calories, the nutrient dense foods. And then particularly those who are in the prenatal, pregnancy, postpartum, and breastfeeding stages of life, those are the most uh I'm gonna say nutrient depletive stages of life. Again, because when you're not in that prenatal stage, your body is getting ready to to prepare for that pregnancy. Hold on 1 minute. I think we talked about it, excuse me, during our last call is um, when we're in that pregnancy and postpartum breastfeeding stages of life, our bodies are getting depleted from all that it's gone through and all that it's doing, and so we want to make sure that, especially during those stages of life, that we're as much as possible eating those nutrient dense real foods. Um, so I think, yeah, I'll end with that. And it, healthy menstruation forms the base of your fertility, and that's important whether or not you plan to go through pregnancy in the future.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for that and that other great summary as well. And before we run away, I would love for you to take a moment to let everyone know where they can find you, let them know your website, any type of social media handles, so that way they can connect with you. And if y'all have questions related to nutrition, dietetics, please reach out to Rhoda because clearly you can tell she's passionate about what she's doing, and we want to make sure that you are well supported across the lifespan because yeah, even though fertility is like a brief portion of the female lifespan, it still is an important thing. Even if, like you mentioned before, even if you desire to have kids or if you do not, it still tells us a lot about your health. So make sure you have the support in this area. So Rhoda, let us know where everyone can find you.
I'm working on a website, so I don't currently have a website, but you can find me obviously on Instagram, where you might have seen the posting for this Zoom. So Instagram, my Instagram handle is Fertile Maven, and that's on Instagram. I also have a Facebook account, but I generally hang out in Instagram. So you can find me there. Feel free to follow me or send me a message. Send me any questions that you might have that we either didn't cover today, or if you'd like more information on what we did cover, we can go into it in more detail. Yeah.
Awesome. And so I will at the bottom, I will make sure that in the description that you all can have a link to connect directly with Rhoda to her Instagram page. But thank y'all for joining, whether you joined live or watching the recording. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you learned something. If you have questions or comments, please put them down in below, and I will make sure that if it's something I can answer, I'll answer. If not, I'm going to route you to Rhoda. That way she can comment, kind of chime in as well. So that way you know that you are getting accurate information. So thank y'all so much for joining us.